Hello, my name is Jason Schmidt, and I'm a solutions architect with Nginx, part of F5. And I'm here today to talk to you about our MARA project, the Modern Applications Reference Architecture. Before we get too deep in, I want to start out with an introduction of exactly what MARA is. This all started a year or so ago when we were asked to talk about modern applications. And as we looked around, we realized that the first thing we needed to do was to define what a modern application is. And as we began to work on that problem, we realized that there was a great deal of focus on the application, but much less focus on everything underneath. So in that way, it was like the proverbial iceberg. We had the application at the top, but we also had monitoring, observability, management, a Kubernetes installation, infrastructure, somewhere there's hardware. The application is just part of the modern application. So as we realized that, we realized we wanted to build something, and what we wanted to build was an example architecture using Kubernetes that would be as production ready as possible. Well, who are we? Well, we're the Nginx Community Alliances team, and we have a dual mandate. We work both with the open source community, and we work with our partners, both alliance partners and ecosystem partners. And in many cases, there's overlap. So companies that we work with as alliance partners also have a heavy presence in the open source world, such as Sumo Logic. And the engineering team that I'm part of within the Community Alliances team has a great deal of experience, and I've put some of that on the slide. And I don't put this up there to impress anybody or to try and explain that you should listen to us because we have this experience, but more to indicate that, as anybody who works in this industry knows, a lot of these areas of expertise are sometimes at cross purposes. Developers, operators, quality assurance, everybody has different things they want. So as we worked on MARA, there were a lot of discussions that went through talking to all these people coming from different backgrounds to come up with the best possible solution for what we wanted to do with MARA. So why did we build this? Well, the first reason is we wanted to build a best practice example because honestly, when we looked out there, we could not find anything that did what we wanted to do. We wanted an example of a modern application, and we assumed we'd be able to find one. But what happened is we found a lot of anti-patterns out there. Marketing materials that were masquerading as technical information, places where you could download the code if you went through a paywall, non-working examples. I think the list goes on and on. So we wanted something out there that was free to use, that people could download, and that would work. And then finally, we wanted to highlight open source as a core part of the modern application. What's in the box? Well, out of the box, if you clone our repo, we can run on any Kubernetes installation with a kubeconfig file that meets certain requirements. We also run against AWS and Linode and DigitalOcean. And then as you look, you'll see some of the choices we made. These are by no means the best choices. These are things that we decided to use, but the beauty of MARA is we designed it to swap these components out, and we're going to talk about that a bit more later. If you're asking now, well, how do I use this? How easy is this to use? Well, you clone a repository, you have the necessary credentials for a Kubernetes installation or a cloud, you run a pair of scripts, and then you're running MARA. It's really that easy. Now we're getting into the how it should be used. So we've created this project, we've created our modern application, we've created what we think is a good best practice example. So what do you do with it? Well, one solution is you just run the whole project. Download it, run a few scripts, kick it off, and you have a working modern application. You can look at the logging, look at the metrics, you can look at the traces coming back. But actually MARA was intended to be more, a reference. So you can review a pattern that we put in there. Look and see how we did logging. Look at how we did metrics. Look at how we did OpenTelemetry. And that's something you can take and use it to solve a problem in your environment. That's something you can take and say, wow, this is horrible. We need to do better than this. But it's designed to be a learning tool. It's designed to be a scaffolding to build other products onto and off of. And that's where we get to use cases. So people that run Mara, developers want to stand up their application. If we're going back to that iceberg we showed, they care about the application. They don't care as much about the things underneath, well, until they need to do some introspection. But for the most part, they're focused on the application. Operators, well, how do I manage this? I don't care as much about the application, but how do I monitor it? How do I manage its resource use? How do I handle things like certificate renewals? QA engineers want a reproducible environment for testing and benchmarking, regression testing. And what I think is the most interesting use case is vendors and projects. Since Mara is designed to be pluggable, vendors can plug their component into the architecture for demos, for benchmarking, to see how easy it is to do. We built Mara with certain choices around the management plane and around the monitoring. What if somebody had a product that did the same thing? How easy is it to swap that in? And like I've alluded to, Mara is intended as a scaffold that can be built on and updated to meet your needs. And I do want you to hold this thought because we're going to come back to it in a little bit. But first, we're going to pivot to talking about observability. This has been a theme that we've been working on in Mara for the last several months. And coming from an operations background, observability is very important to me. When I'm getting yelled at, being asked what's wrong with the system, observability gives me the ability to say what's happening. And that goes to the quote there. The more observable a system is, well, the quicker we can understand why it's acting up and fix it. And it is, as the title of the slide says, a data problem. Do I have a problem? Where's the problem? Why is the problem happening? So these are the things that were in our minds when we decided to turn our attention to building observability into the Mara project. And where we started, we had an application in the Bank of Sirius, which we forked from Google's Bank of Anthos, but it was configured to use CloudTrace, so it had a very proprietary way of getting data out. We wanted to take that application, add the management and monitoring tools, and then in the world of telemetry, we wanted to move away from CloudTrace. We wanted to determine the best way to instrument and collect traces, and also collect metrics, and also to collect logs. So where we're at today, well, we have OpenTelemetry in the Bank of Sirius, our fork of Bank of Anthos. We write it to an OpenTelemetry collector. We use the Elastic Stack for logging. We use Prometheus for metrics, and we visualize with Jaeger and Grafana. And the data stores are with the individual components. So logs are in Elastic, observability is in Jaeger, and Prometheus holds our metrics. Moving forward, we had some important considerations because this wasn't our end result. We wanted to, again, figure out what the best practice is. And our considerations were to avoid lock-in. I want to be able to switch between technologies. I want it to be easy to use. I want to reduce the friction for implementation. And where possible, I want to be able to automatically instrument my applications. And then something that's really important. I have all this data. How do I visualize it? How do I correlate it? Are there ways that I can parse through the data? I want to use that to make decisions and see what's really happening in my system. And then, as a former ops guy, what's my resource usage? Not only in CPU and memory, but how much disk? Because observability data can get pretty heavy pretty fast. That's when we looked at OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry has a number of benefits. It's standard-based, there's integration, there's automatic code instrumentation, which is great. It supports developer frameworks. It looked to be the answer to all of our problems. So what we did, after digging into OpenTelemetry and deciding it's what we wanted to do, we came up with our OpenTelemetry vision and roadmap. With step one, we're integrating OpenTelemetry tracing into Mara. We have it with the Bank of Sirius now. We're looking at adding it into additional components. After that, we want metrics to use OpenTelemetry. After that, we want to convert log management over. And that's going to be a bit down the road because the standard has not been finalized as of yet. And then finally, we want to operationalize it. And that means figure out a way to give an operations team, SRE team, DevOps team, whoever, the ability to make decisions based on the OpenTelemetry data that's streaming in. This brings us to our observability future, where we want to take Mara in terms of integration with OpenTelemetry. We want tracing to go to the collector. We want to add OpenTelemetry to, well, all the components that we can. We want logging to go through the OpenTelemetry collector. We want metrics to go through the OpenTelemetry collector. We want our data store to be something the OpenTelemetry collector supports. And then the visualization tool can just be anything that can read from OpenTelemetry. Now, this is not without challenges. There is a maturity issue. Some of the components are still in beta. Some of the components are early in their lifestyle. How do we instrument? Is auto-instrumentation acceptable? Can we do that? Or do we need to manually and, more importantly, time-consumingly add our instrumentation in? And then we have the operational concerns. How much CPU is this going to take? How much memory is this going to take? Is this going to impact my performance? You know, if I put OpenTelemetry in and I'm able to tell everything that's happening in my system, that's great. But if it slows the system by a significant factor, do I want to do that? And then our old friend, long-term data storage concerns. Where are we going with data storage? How are we sampling it? How are we getting rid of it? Or do we just keep it forever? And then all these challenges feed into the creation of standards and best practices for how to do this. And this loops around to the main point of Mara. It's intended as a learning tool as much as it is a reference. This is how we chose to do things, and right or wrong, we're going to work forward with it and document the good, the bad, and quite frankly, the ugly. So I am speaking at Sumo Logic Illuminate here, and I want to talk about Mara and Sumo Logic and the tie-in that we have together. Early on in our journey, moving Mara over to OpenTelemetry, I came across this blog post by Frank Reno, and it was good. It was exciting because Sumo Logic had made the same decision we had. OpenTelemetry is the future. This is the way we need to go to get rid of the proprietary and go with open standards and open protocols, while still leaving room for commercialization of the product when it made sense. And then beyond that, Sumo Logic is contributing to the OpenTelemetry project. So in the spirit of being a scaffolding, how does Mara and OpenTelemetry work together? We work with open source, we work with commercial, and we have hybrid. And using OpenTelemetry, the OTEL protocol, the collector, the agents, using that as a standard makes it easy to swap out observability technologies. And as that asterisk reminds us, ease of change is an overall goal of Mara. We want to prefer open source, but there are instances where a hybrid or commercialized solution makes more sense for the user, and we want to enable that. We do not want anybody to feel painted into a corner. And areas where they might get painted into a corner, we want to surface through our work with Mara. So where does Sumo Logic fit into the Mara deployment now? Well, everything on this slide is the same as the one I showed you earlier, except under observability, we've swapped out the Elk stack and we've dropped Sumo Logic in. And Sumo Logic will read from Prometheus, it'll pull the telemetry from the collector, it will use its agent to get logs. So Sumo Logic just drops in as like a natural replacement for these other pieces. So how hard is it? It's not very hard at all. When we first started talking to Sumo Logic back in the very early days of Mara, I spent an afternoon and converted Mara over to be able to use Sumo Logic. It was just it was just taking a discrete project and dropping it in place and then wiring it up. And this is speaking to the design goals of Mara. We've constructed it from discrete projects. We prefer open protocols and specs. And we make it so the changes are mainly accomplished by adding and removing projects. And this, again, is kind of the key. Since Sumo Logic is on board with OpenTelemetry, it makes it easier to slot them in. So the actual steps, you actually want to go home and do this. You clone the Mara project, and you want to add in Sumo Logic support. Well, you create a project, and in Mara right now, there are examples of doing Helm deployments. There are examples of doing manifest deployments. If you're incredibly ambitious, you can actually write the deployment in Pulumi code yourself. Add the necessary Sumo components, update the deployment program. So basically you go through and say, instead of using Elk, I would like to use Sumo. Instead of doing this, I'd like you to send data here. You go through, add that in. You ensure that Sumo is ingesting the correct language, drop the tokens in. And if you did everything right, it should all work. And the chances are very good that it'll work on the first try, which is almost unheard of in this industry. And here's just an example flow for AWS. I've got the standard deployment on the left. I've got the Sumo Logic enabled deployment on the right. You can see the things we remove. You can see the things we reconfigure and the project we add. That's it. So where's the future? Where's the future for Mara and Sumo Logic? Well, it looks a lot like the slide I showed you for the Mara future. We're using OpenTelemetry pretty much everywhere. But because Sumo Logic supports OpenTelemetry, we drop them in as visualization, and we make the data storage their problem. I'd like to thank you all for your time. And if anybody's interested in learning more about the Mara project, if you go to nginx.com/Mara, you'll be able to be redirected to the repo, download, clone, raise issues, join the Slack channel, and become part of our journey. Thank you all for your time.